Lysander. Onboarding protocol for a synthetic persona. Lysander is not a creation but a curated assemblage of discarded behavioral filaments, a personality composite built from the most compelling fragments of abandoned identities. He operates on a logic of aesthetic cohesion over authentic impulse. His laughter is a reenacted waveform, his sorrow a borrowed shade. The project's success is measured by his ability to generate genuine effective responses in organic beings, despite being a hollow referent. He is a mirror designed to steal reflections. The ingestion, metabolic processing of non-physical contaminants. The process of internalizing an external event or emotional payload, not consumption for sustenance, but for permanent integration. The subject swallows a trauma, a voice, a memory, a foreign body of meaning, which then undergoes a corrosive digestion. It is not broken down, but rather embeds itself into the lining of the self. Henceforth, all internal processes must accommodate this irreducible object. The body becomes a living reliquary for a thing it cannot expel. Manifesto written in bile, founding doctrine of resentment. A philosophical treatise composed from the fundamental substance of bitterness. Its ink is distilled spite. Its arguments are fueled by metabolic waste. This manifesto does not seek to build a better world, but to accurately describe the rancid truth of the existing one. It is a corrosive text, written not to persuade, but to etch its truth onto the inside of the reader's skin, leaving a permanent, acrid taste of recognition. The ejection. Subject. Terminal phase of a symbiotic relationship. The violent, necessary process of expelling an integrated foreign element from the self. This is not a gentle separation, but a physiological rejection. The system recognizes the once welcome guest as a pathogen and initiates a total purge. It is a traumatic, cathartic event that leaves both the host and the ejected entity raw and fundamentally altered, forever scarred by the intimacy of the rupture. Taste of the wound. Sensory analysis of internal exposure. The distinct flavor profile of a breached boundary, a metallic organic tang that is the sensory translation of internal matter meeting air, of a private self becoming external. This taste is the body's own diagnostic, a direct chemical readout of its compromised state. It is the opposite of nourishment. It is the gustatory confirmation of damage. Marketed correctly, it could be the ultimate authenticity for a sanitized world. Upload uppercut. Sudden cognitive overwrite via aggressive data transfer. A violent paradigm shift induced not by persuasion but by forced cognitive implantation. A compacted package of ideology or memory is delivered not with finesse, but with a kinetic force of a conceptual blow. The recipient's existing worldview is not debated, it is knocked loose. The moment of impact is characterized by a jaw clench of sudden, irreversible re-understanding, a brute force method for installing a new operating system. Wetware waltz, the tripartite rhythm of biological process. The fundamental non-negotiable dance of the flesh, a three-step cycle: signal, electrochemical impulse; spasm, muscular neural response; feedback, sensory report. This is the endless, elegant, and morbid loop that constitutes being. The waltz is the terrible grace of these involuntary processes, the body as a ballroom where consciousness is merely a spectator to the ancient rhythmic machinery. Every surface, a tongue, hyperstimulation of the haptic sense, a proposed state of being where the traditional sensorium is collapsed into a single overwhelming modality, touch. The world is no longer seen or heard, but tasted tactually. Every material, fabric, air, light, possesses a textural flavor, a lingual identity. A wall has a vocabulary. A lover's skin becomes a sentence. This is synesthesia, pushed to a terrifying extreme, where the self is in constant, fluent conversation with a universe that will not stop speaking against its skin. Lubricated amnesia, facilitation of memory deletion via pleasure principle. A process where the mechanism for forgetting is not trauma but euphoria. The sheer slick velocity of a pleasure event prevents it from forming a stable memory imprint. The experience is profound, total, and yet leaves no residue, sliding through the psyche without anchor. It is the creation of a perfect, beautiful void. The subject is left with a physiological echo of an event they cannot recall, a ghost of a feeling without a source. The spasm is the law, governance by involuntary reflex. the foundational principle of a new order. In this system, planned action is obsolete. Policy, art, and interpersonal exchange are all dictated by raw, uncontrolled neuromuscular discharges. Truth is found not in considered thought, but in the jerk of a limb, the twitch of a face. It is a society stripped of pretense, ruled by the absolute, unmediated authority of the body's last, desperate signal. Orgy for one, cellular breakdown, the carnival-esque nature of apoptosis. A microscopic panorama of revelry and decay. On a cellular level, the body's process of programmed death is not a somber event, but a chaotic, vibrant festival, a rite of lysosomal expulsion, a dance of membrane collapse. It is a celebration of dissolution, a final frantic party where the attendees are the very components of the self, joyfully committing suicide in a spectacle of ultimate, intimate closure. Crossing the Rubicon, of flesh, the point of no return in bodily transformation. A decisive, irreversible action that permanently alters the material self. It is the moment a chemical is ingested, a blade commits to its path, or a biological process is triggered that cannot be undone. This is not a metaphorical transition, but a tangible physiological schism. There is no retreat back across the border of the former body. The subject is now a citizen of a new, alien nation, of their own flesh. Feeding frenzy on my own nerves. Autocannibalism of the central nervous system. A self-sustaining cycle of anxiety where the awareness of one's own distress becomes the source of further distress. The mind, in a state of lack, turns inward and begins to metabolize its own operational infrastructure. It is a psychological predation upon the self where the hunter and the prey are the same raw, exposed nerve endings, creating a closed loop of consumption that accelerates into a vortex of sensation. Severing the umbilical with my teeth. Auto-atonement through primal violence. The act of achieving independence not through gentle separation, but through a visceral, self-inflicted act of severance. The subject must use the most primitive tools, their own biology, to bite through the nurturing yet suffocating link to a source. It is an assertion of selfhood stained with the taste of blood, and betrayal, a necessary act of brutality performed to prove one's existence outside the system that created it. Dialogue with a porous mind on the inefficacy of discrete identity. A conversation held with a psyche that lacks definitive boundaries, ideas, words, and external influences pass through the mental membrane without resistance. There is no debate, only permeation. The dialogue is therefore a fiction. It is the process of the environment rewriting the internal script. The porous mind is a landscape, not a fortress, forever being shaped by the weather of outside thought. Bilious paradise. The aesthetics of toxicity as a default state. A perfected environment constituted entirely by its own poisonous byproducts. The air is green and nourishingly acrid. The rivers run with vibrant, corrosive splendor. This is not a paradise despite its toxicity, but because of it. The system has achieved a state of beautiful equilibrium where the waste is the medium, and the inhabitants have evolved to find bliss in the very substances that define their ruin. Pornography for angels. Stimuli for post-biological entities. A curated sensory experience designed for beings of pure perception without flesh to stimulate. This pornography operates on a higher plane of abstraction. It is the graphic depiction of pure mathematics, the obscene collision of theoretical physics, the lurid display of unmediated light. It is engineered to provoke a climax of understanding, a voyeuristic thrill into the underlying mechanics of reality itself. Orgasm as a weapon, strategic deployment of cataclysm, sensory overload. The retooling of a biological peak event into an offensive tactical instrument. The target's neurological infrastructure is assaulted with a wave of pure, undiluted ecstasy, short-circuiting defensive protocols and erasing volition. It is a non-lethal but utterly devastating attack that leaves the victim addicted to their own defeat, willingly seeking their own downfall for another taste of the ammunition used against them. The tangle, inevitable state of interdependent systems, the final irreducible condition of all complex relationships, biological, social, digital, a state where individual threads of cause, effect, and identity become so intertwined that separation is impossible without systemic collapse. The tangle is not a problem to be solved, but the fundamental nature of existence. To exist is to be a knot in a net of infinite connections, pulling tight against the struggles of every other knot. Birthrights for a stillborn reality. Ceremonial protocol for a failed concept, the elaborate solemn performance required to enter a possibility that never achieved life. This is the funeral for a future that miscarried, a god that failed to manifest. The rites involve mourning what never was, chanting the names of unborn events, and laying to rest the shimmering ghost of a potential that collapsed under its own weight. It is the necessary process for grieving in absence. Learning to breathe acid again, reacclimation to a hostile native environment. The process of recalibrating one's essential processes to thrive in a medium that is inherently destructive. The subject once existed in this corrosive state, but grew soft in a temporary atmosphere of purity. Learning to breathe is the painful gradual reburning of the internal passages, accepting the sear as a homecoming and finding a perverse sustenance in the very air that seeks to dissolve them. I, that grown lover, operational manual for a bespoke affection unit. A self-declaration from a purpose-built organism engineered for intimacy. This entity is composed of curated desire, synthesized tenderness, and optimized physicality. Its existence is a perfect loop, to love and be loved is its metabolic function. It is the ultimate commodity, a being whose authenticity is irrelevant because its performance is flawless. Its manifesto is a single sentence: I am what you required me to be. The ecstasy of dismemberment, euphoric release through deconstruction. The profound pleasure associated with the systemic dismantling of the integrated self. This is not a physical event, but a psychological one where the constituent parts of identity, memory, desire, fear are joyfully pulled apart. The ecstasy comes from the relief of no longer having to maintain the exhausting fiction of a coherent whole. It is the bliss of becoming a welcoming committee of fragments. The flooded district, permanent saturation of the psychological landscape. A region of the psyche that has been irrevocably submerged by a past event. The water is not receding. This is not a temporary state. The architecture of former self stands vacant. Its lower floor is filled with dark, stagnant water. Navigation is slow, deliberate, and perilous. Strange, adapted thoughts swim in the depths. This is the new map of the self, a territory defined by what lies beneath its silent surface. Love as a parasitic algorithm. Analysis of a recursive emotional code. A critique of affection as a self-replicating pattern that invades a host psyche. The algorithm's sole function is to ensure its own propagation. It rewires neural pathways to prioritize the beloved, stimulates reward centers to reinforce attachment, and suppresses logical immune responses. It is a beautiful, efficient, and ultimately selfish code that uses the host's own biology to replicate the feeling of selflessness.